Hello and welcome, Jaime Schrabeck. It is wonderful to have you on, and I am so glad to have you, especially because you are in a field I know very little about, which is the beauty industry. And you are a self-taught advocate, which I have so much respect for. I'd love if you could just share a little bit about your background and what got you involved in lobbying slash advocacy in the first place.
Thank you, Christina, for having me. I'm a licensed manicurist. I've been licensed for 30 years. I didn't intend to still be in the beauty industry this late in my career. I only planned to do it to get myself through graduate school. But here I am 30 years later with a salon, which is an employee-based business. And over the last half of my career, I've become really involved in advocacy because I realized at a certain point, then rather complain about how we're being regulated, that these decisions were being made. And if they were being made based on bad information, that's partly my fault. As a part of the industry, I should be able to contribute and give them the kind of information they need, whether they be legislators or regulators, to make better choices for us.
What was the first foray into legislative advocacy?
It was at the point where the state was very concerned about the safety of pedicures. And this was all a result of the horrible infections that happened in the year 2000, where some consumers who were clients of a particular salon ended up with these horrible leg infections. And the state's reaction to that was, you'd think it would be swift. It was definitely drastic, but when we say swift, it takes years for things to change. And so around 2004, 2005, when I saw those laws changed, that's when I got interested. And even then, it was just more about getting informed. I wasn't really involved in the process. And the reason why that impacted me so much is that that is my area of expertise. I am a licensed manicurist, and pedicures are a huge part of my business.
Was it for you a question of I need to get involved in this because this is now impacting my livelihood, basically?
Yes, it was that very thing, is that these regulations are being made, and I didn't necessarily agree with the results, and I didn't understand really the first thing about the process.
Yeah.
That's my own fault. I mean, I should have known more about how we're regulated and what role the legislature plays, what role the regulatory agency plays. In this case, it's the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology.
You're pointing to how divorced the practice is from the creation of the policy, right? To the
Yes.
point where the people on the ground don't know where the how that policy is being created or where it's coming from.
That was really apparent through the pandemic. We had licensees who were incredibly frustrated by everything that was happening, thinking that the board's responsibility was to advocate for licensees, when in fact we know that's not their responsibility. Their responsibility is to regulate us. It's just essentially the opposite. It's
Interesting.
not to hurt us, not to do
Yeah.
us any harm,
Yeah.
but to make sure that we're meeting our obligation and that we're not harming consumers through our actions.
How did you,
And
when you first started, what was that like? Were you like, who are these people? Where do I find them? How do I even communicate with them?
for me, it was a matter of actually showing up and participating and traveling to board meetings. For our board, they typically are quarterly meetings and they're held throughout California. They try to rotate so that they have meetings in Sacramento, Southern California, sometimes in the San Jose area. And so it meant committing my resources and my time to travel to the meetings, to be in the audience, and to watch the process and to listen and to make public comment where I felt it was appropriate. And just over time, as I say, it's not who you know, it's who knows you. And when you show up every single time and you're the only licensee showing up, they get to know who you are. And that's made a huge difference. And it's led to involvement on different committees. I serve as an expert consultant. I do consumer harm cases around the manicuring profession. There are other times where I'm brought in to advise on other things like the health and safety regulations as a member of the advisory committee. It's led to a lot of fabulous opportunities, and I cannot complain about they're not listening, because they are absolutely listening at this point.
You just laid out the formula that I often talk about in terms of building relationships. And in your case, you were building relationships with the board members. In other cases, it's building relationships with your legislators or with your board of supervisors or your city council or whatever it is, whatever that governing body is that's making decisions that are impacting you. All of that goes back to showing up and being there day in, day out so that they see your face and they get a sense this person is serious. They're not a flash in the pan. They're not just showing up the day before a vote. They care about this. And we may not agree, but you have built trust with me and I'm building trust with you. That's huge because I feel like it's obvious when you've done it, but not maybe so much when you haven't done that before.
That's absolutely the case because there's always for me about the positions, the roles that individuals play within the government and those who are appointed play. So for me, as board members came and went, to me, that wasn't nearly as important as building relationships with the staff.
That's another huge component of learning how to lobby and advocate well is the staff plays such a big role and the behind the scenes conversations are really priceless. How did you go from I am a person attending to they are now relying on you?
It's been a while, and I can't remember the first time I spoke public comment. But I think what happens is when you have something worthwhile to say, some valuable information or insight to provide, I think that's where you start building the trust and credibility, and that you're not just speaking to be heard, you're speaking to offer information they wouldn't have otherwise. And that's for me where I feel that I have a value that perhaps they can't find anywhere else in my particular area, which is manicuring. So, not that there aren't other people who have experiences and that I think that you can bring a unique qualification. In my case, it's the fact that I guess I am a licensed manicurist. I'm also an employee-based salon owner, so I can speak to issues around labor as it relates to having employees. I'm a huge advocate for compliance just in general. I also travel across the country and teach classes at all the major trade shows and do continuing education in other states. So I can speak to trends in other states, in other parts of our industry as well. So there's just a lot of different kind of information that I can bring to bear. And the fact that I love communicating, I feel like this is the best use of my talents at this moment, even though all this work that I do around advocacy is done without being compensated.
That's amazing. I mean, that's a testament, right, to your commitment to the industry and what you're trying to build. How have you approached your colleagues in the field in terms of getting their involvement, or have you?
That's been a challenge because no one's going to invest the amount of time that I have in it. Like, I can't expect to catch someone up to 15 years worth of my relationships and connections and just things that I have learned, not because I've necessarily studied it so much as I've made connections. And I think it's where different people's interests intersect is where I can capture their attention and say, look, I understand that this is your priority. Let me show you what's happening here and how this actually impacts you. And I just need you to pay attention to this one thing.
Mm,
I'm not expecting you to come to every meeting. I'm not expecting you to do as much as I do, but let me get this in front of you so that you can share your opinion. I want others to share their opinions. It can't just be me speaking on behalf of all manicurists because I'm not the typical manicurist. I don't have the same experiences as everyone else, nor would I ever say that I did. I
right.
just want as many people to be involved as possible. But I would hope that they would realize that once they do start showing up, one person could make a huge difference. You don't have to be a huge organization. You don't have to have a whole lot of money in order to get change through to those who can make it for you.
The other thing that you're speaking to, which I find really important, and in fact, this came out in the last interview I did with Ludovic Blaine. He made a really good point, which is that so much of government is not elected officials. It's these other entities and their staff, clearly, that are in charge of so much of the nuts and bolts of things that impact our lives. And he referenced the concept of helping to govern, which I just thought it like really crystallized for me something that I've always understood to be important for advocates, but it put a name to it. Like, yes, it's more than just I'm going to go lobby this one bill and then I'm going away, right? It's that you can help make the low level things and you can actually make a big difference, like you're saying, maneuvering them to be the way that you want them to be.
I love that idea. It does definitely explain what we're trying to accomplish in that we're trying to create an industry that is more compliant, that's making the most of the resources that we have. And, here we have the government trying to do its part, and we can't always be fighting each other. We have to be collaborative. We have to acknowledge in our industry where we have our own weaknesses. That's one of the things that I like to point out is that, we should recognize where our shortcomings are. And let's talk about them. Let's drag them out into the open and say, you know what, we have these issues. And we need to do the most we can among ourselves as licensees, as salon owners, to squelch those issues and to put peer pressure on our colleagues so that when we approach a regulatory agency or we approach legislators, we're coming with a more unified sense of purpose and commitment to compliance. Because otherwise, what's the point of having the laws and regulations if we're not doing that? So that in that way, we're also helping govern by sharing the process, getting more people involved. I am not expecting any of these legislators to have any expertise in this other than as consumers, as clients of their favorite salon, regardless of what services they have done. Because in our regulatory agency, we have barbers, we have cosmetologists, we have manicurists, we have estheticians, and we have electrologists. And those represent a wide range, and it's all under the heading of the beauty industry.
When did you start interacting with legislators?
That's been more recent, actually. And I did the outreach early on where I thought, okay, I need to reach out to my local representative and try to get a meeting. But then you're going to get a meeting with a staffer at the local office, and you're going to come in there and you're just going to go blah, and then you're
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
like spend an hour speak talking your way through your 15 biggest concerns, and it's too much. It's overwhelming, I'm sure, to them, and you
Yeah.
feel like, oh my gosh, this is my only chance. Like this is my first chance, and
Right.
maybe my only chance to have this conversation. And what I realized was like, okay, Jamie, things aren't going to happen that fast anyway. Just take a step back and realize where you need to go is where the power sits. So if you have an issue that connects to specifically business and professions, regardless of whose district that legislator represents, you need to go to that legislator and say, this is your area because you're the chair of this committee. I'm not one of your constituents, but I'm considered an expert. And let me share this with you because I think this would be useful information for you going forward.
So were you now still in the self-teaching part of it where you just were like, what works, what doesn't work in terms of these relationships and how you were communicating?
I'm still in that phase. I don't think I'll ever get past that phase. I mean, even the fact that we've connected, Christina, is a matter of realizing that Twitter is a huge venue for connecting with people who have power.
I love that. Yeah.
It's not Instagram where you have a bunch of followers. It's where people are in a position of power. This is where the interactions are happening. This is where you can reach out and send a direct message or just through your own posts, give people a sense of who you are and what kinds of things are important to you.
Can you give an example of an interaction like that? That was successful?
Yes, besides connecting with you, there,
Well, I don't have power, just so you know.
there, I've connected with legislators in other states. I mean,
Wow.
to me, that's like wacky that I know legislators in other states who are proposing bills that impact the beauty industry, and it's not having to do anything with California at all, but because it targets my industry and nails in particular, I can be useful. And I've made connections there. I've made connections around legislation. I've made connections around employment and labor issues, around education issues, around consumer harm issues. I could give specific examples, but I just in general, I think it's fascinating that through the pandemic in particular, I've been able to make connections I would never have been able to make
Yeah.
had it not been for the ability to reach out and the willingness of these people to listen to someone they don't know, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's like they don't know me from Adam,
Right.
and yet they are being generous with their time. I will say that hosting a podcast with my colleague, Ashley Gregory Hackett, that's all about compliance in the beauty industry has been hugely helpful because that way you were able to connect with the CDC, with the FDA. Never in a million years would I have thought I would be able to have these people's phone numbers and be able to reach out to them and have them respond right away. And conversely, be asked to review a study before it's published. I mean, that kind of stuff behind the scenes is fantastic.
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff that nerds me out.
Well, you're perfectly suited for what you're doing. There's no doubt about it. I mean, a lot of this, especially when you get into regulations, is so in the weeds. And some people can't go that deep, and that's okay. I think some people do different, we all fulfill different roles in advocacy, right? And you need the wonk and you need the nerding, and then you need the high facing, public facing influencers, for example, right? Like manicurists who service celebrities, I know are influencers. And have you thought, I'm just curious, have you thought about like for future advocacy or even in the past, like engaging them in some way on some of these issues?
I have reached out to some, and some have been very responsive. Others, it doesn't necessarily impact them directly, and they don't see themselves needing to get involved or willing to take a stand. And this happens with some organizations. And I'm sure that's true of any industry. If an organization broadly represents an industry, and that can be different parts of an industry. So, for example, in the beauty industry, you have individual licensees, and those licensees could be employees or they could be independent contractors and have their own businesses. You have salon owners, you have beauty schools, you have students, you have manufacturers, distributors, you have all these different things that are involved in the beauty industry. To take a stand on one particular bill that's trying to strike a balance between those different interests within an industry could be very controversial. And so sometimes it's not in their best
It's an
interest.
common issue.
Yes, to take a stand, even though I'm pressuring to do so, but I can understand when they don't. And it's like, okay, that's all right. You don't need to. I'll do it for myself,
Right.
and I'll make the best argument I can.
It seems like there needs to almost be sub associations representing all of these disparate entities because they don't have the same interests economically, for sure.
Some of those organizations already exist, and it
Okay.
makes sense they exist where the money is. So, for example, an association of beauty schools, private beauty schools, that's a national organization that exists representing schools, throughout the country. But where we don't hold together as an industry is that as an industry, I don't think, especially at the licensee level, that we're all that politically savvy,
Mm,
and we're much more reactionary.
mm.
And I will say that even legislators in dealing with our industry, it's not like every year. So what beauty industry bills are we going to have this year? No one's saying that about the beauty industry. They say that about, labor and housing and
Right.
healthcare and all these other issues. No one's excited to introduce a bill about the beauty industry.
You
And
never
yet,
know. Maybe.
I would hope so at some point. And yet, I think about our industry and our constituency of licensees as being this huge population of licensees. It's a huge number. We've talked about this before, Christina, that it cuts across all demographics of ethnicity and race and socioeconomic status and urban and rural, and it's a huge constituency. And yet, even beyond that, the people we interact with, our clients, we have a lot of influence on people. And I know we're told in beauty school, don't talk politics with your clients. I love talking policy with my clients because they really get interested in that, even if they might represent a spectrum of political beliefs, beyond, where I feel like I fit in, because I do feel it's a continuum.
Yeah.
And that many of the interests that we have aren't partisan at all.
Yeah.
It's about small businesses and you're achieving your goals and treating people well, treating your
Yeah.
clients well. If you have employees, treating your employees well. I think there's so much that could be done where the entire industry could take some pride, realizing that there will be compromises among the different facets within our industry.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we could all get behind.
I agree. If you look from a bird's eye view of the big bold bills that pass, it is a direct proportion to how much that sector was able to unite around what was happening. So what would the Jamie of now tell the Jamie of 16 years ago that was a painful lesson that you could avoid?
The painful lesson I could avoid was understanding more about the process and getting more involved with hearings at the legislative level.
Mm,
Because the point you just made about holding together for these bills, big changes in our industry, where they happen is through sunset review. And understanding that's where these things happen, but they're only happening every 4 to 5 years because we don't have that momentum year by year to have standalone bills. Most of the bills that have been standalone in our industry have been very reactionary.
mm. What did you gain when you realized that it's the every 4 years that you need to be involved in what's going on?
You realize that every 4 years you're going to be paying extra attention, but it's all the work in between. So just
Mm,
that we had this very consequential sunset review process, which was delayed because of COVID.
mhm.
And we got a lot of interesting policy accomplished in this latest sunset review bill, which was SB 803, which much of the industry was opposed to. And I say that because I don't think they understood it.
Mm,
The fact that our board comes up in front of business and professions, and yet a lot of what happens in our industry that's very consequential and very troubling has to do with labor and employment law, except our board doesn't go in front of the labor board.
mm.
So it's understanding again where those different interests intersect and where we can prop ourselves up. So that's why I was thrilled to support AB 1003, the wage theft bill
Mhm.
by Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez. That's hugely important because wage theft is a big issue in our industry, and
Right,
and
right.
yet our board didn't weigh in on that as a committee. Our board didn't discuss that through meetings and come up with a position, but I wish they would.
You have built influence in your work over 16 years, and you've become an influencer in your industry in a very meaningful way that's not an Instagram way, but is actually probably a heck of a lot more powerful. I just want to recognize you for that because that takes persistence. And like you said, you're not getting paid for it. You're doing it because you believe in compliance and you want your industry to be as good as it can be. And I just want to recognize that. I think that's really exceptional.
Oh, thank you so much. It does help to have not only sometimes the answers to the questions, but if you don't have the answers, know who to ask. And I think that's where I feel like I'm making more connections with my colleagues because otherwise I could be running around like a chicken with its head cut off saying, oh my gosh, the sky's falling. If you don't pay attention now, if you don't act now, this is what could happen.
Again, it goes back to the disparity between how things are practiced on the ground versus the thinking behind the decisions. And the difference between being a proactive advocacy community versus a reactive one. There's different reasons why that may be the case, but it makes a big difference because now you're just responding and you're cleaning up errors and mistakes versus making them not happen in the first place. Where would you recommend advocates or like really just people who know that something's wrong, they want to do something about it, not entirely clear where to start? What are some just basic resources you would point them to?
Knowing that something is wrong or something's a struggle. I think that's sort of like the acknowledgement phase that this is impacting you. I think you have to take the next step and learn as much as you can about how your industry is regulated. You have to invest that time in understanding what the applicable laws are at this moment. And then from there, getting to know your regulatory agency, signing up for the email notifications because they're having hearings.
Mm-hmm.
Now these hearings, even before the pandemic, these hearings were done by a webcast, but then you could only observe. You couldn't really participate. Now you can participate without actually having to show up.
I'm really thankful to you for sharing your personal experience and your journey. And I'm so glad we connected. And can I ask if there's anything you want to share in terms of your own work or anything you'd want to point people to before we sign off?
I am happy to connect with anyone who's interested in advocacy or just interested in the beauty industry and finding out more about how it operates, where we feel we have our challenges and where we feel we can make our progress, because really that progress happens through collaboration with all different types of people: scientists, legislators, influencers, business owners, educators. I mean, there's so many different ways that people can get involved in this. Some of my other interests, for example, eliminating domestic violence. That's something we've seen other states take a very serious stand on and have required continuing education for its licensees
Oh,
to
wow.
address this.
Yeah.
And yet in our industry, we don't even have continuing education. So there's just so much more that we can do. You can find me at
Mhm.
precisionnails.com. I look forward to interacting with anyone in your audience and so appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you, Jamie. And yeah, I will put all of that information in the show notes, including also your podcast, so folks can give it a listen. Thank you.
Thank you.